Long ago, before Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen ever collided, there was a time when the most controversial thing about the British Grand Prix was that it was debuting a brand new Formula 1 format. It's funny how quickly things can change in F1, with the first ever Saturday sprint race barely being talked about after the weekend thanks to the colossal moment in Sunday's Grand Prix. But there was enormous interest and novelty value in the rejigged weekend schedule, which put qualifying on Friday, a 17-lap race without a pit stop on Saturday, then the main event as usual on Sunday. F1 had great faith in this idea, designed to give new fans an easier route into following racing without having to commit to a 300km Grand Prix, while also appealing to existing fans like you by giving you more of a reason to follow on Friday, making it a real 3-day event and helping race promoters and television broadcasters in the process. There were legitimate concerns though, ranging from the small but significant items like the winner of the sprint being awarded the pole position stat, not the fastest driver in qualifying, to fundamental questions like, is this just going to wreck the entire Grand Prix? Well, now we've got some pretty good initial answers. So while we pick over F1's brand new format, remember to have your say in the comments by letting us know what you thought of either Saturday's race specifically or the wider weekend. Look, while you may detect an overall sense of optimism and pleasant surprise in this video, that's mainly because of the weekend format as a whole. Immediately after the sprint race itself, even some of us cynics were feeling cautiously optimistic. That's despite the sprint itself being just sort of inoffensive. It was about as good a 17-lap F1 race as anyone who has watched an F1 race could really hope for, unless there's an explosive extra variable. The first lap injected jeopardy, it was nice and frantic for a little while, and there were a couple of subplots behind the non-existent fight at the front. Fernando Alonso's charging first lap from 11th to 5th was the chief source of entertainment, while Red Bull's Sergio Perez became the first sprint victim when he spun while racing in the pack. Perez would go on to start the race from the pit lane as Red Bull changed so much of his car to help him fight through the order, yet he still failed to make it back into the points in the Grand Prix. That's exactly the risk the sprint was partly designed to create. In terms of the basic weekend schedule, an hour of practice had been abandoned and replaced by a decent 30-minute F1 race. And before anyone gets angry, we really only mean decent. Nobody's pretending that was a breathless 17 laps of action. Was the race brilliant? No. Did it underline some of F1's shortcomings? Yes. But was it a boring affair? Well, no more than a normal race, and only a third as long. And watching a race on Saturday was a pleasant change of pace, particularly as we'd still been able to enjoy qualifying at the end of a much more interesting Friday. FP1 became a vital session as the only 60 minutes of practice before drivers went into qualifying and teams had to lock in their setups for the entire weekend. It's always enjoyable to see teams and drivers stretched with minimal running before crunch sessions. The uncertainty of the teams having such limited data is usually good value for us. And there's an underappreciated knock-on effect of limited running as well that means track evolution is still high going into qualifying. That probably helped make the conclusions to Q1 and Q2 particularly fast-paced. The late Friday qualifying session did have its flaws. Being so late in the day and without the usual build-up over a day and a half that rises to a Saturday afternoon crescendo, it felt a little flat at times. But hopefully that wasn't the case when it mattered for any of you watching, because the session itself was a worthy climax to a day of anticipation for anyone patiently waiting trackside, or anyone around the world who had either toiled through a working day, woken up early, or stayed up late to tune in. By the end of Friday, the most offensive part of the format felt like the reveal of the Speed King award given to Hamilton for top in qualifying. F1 said the FIA wanted the pole position statistic to reflect who starts the Grand Prix from the front. So the replacement for the pole position award given to Hamilton felt like a token gesture, and it inherently devalued what we waited all day to witness on Friday by telling us that this version of qualifying wasn't as important as the new supposed real version. A few people, including sprint race winner Max Verstappen, felt that qualifying itself had been compromised by the new format. He said qualifying didn't have the same feeling, knowing it wasn't really for pole position, and after he won the sprint race and actually earned pole, he admitted that to be told he'd got it after completing a third of a race distance was a bit odd. That is something for F1 to consider, but the core question before Sunday's race was really whether we were going to get benefits earlier in the weekend at the expense of a weaker Grand Prix. After all, the grid had, with a couple of exceptions, settled even more into race pace order. That included Verstappen taking pole after Hamilton had been quicker in qualifying. But an explosive Grand Prix ensured that the main event really was the main event. Had a conventional Grand Prix followed and Verstappen repeated his sprint race success by keeping Hamilton at arm's length throughout, we'd likely be reflecting a bit more hesitantly. It was a rare, iconic moment that ignited the main race as Verstappen and Hamilton collided in spectacular fashion. While it's tempting to dismiss this as a unique set of circumstances that therefore saved F1 from having a sprint that ruined the Grand Prix, it could equally be viewed as a set of circumstances explicitly created by the sprint itself. Verstappen had taken pole by winning the sprint, in which he jumped Hamilton off the line, then withstood half a lap of attacking before going on to win relatively comfortably without any major pressure. That put Hamilton, frustrated at losing his hard-earned position from qualifying, on the attack on Sunday. And because of the events of the previous day, Hamilton knew that if he didn't get the move done on the first lap, Verstappen would probably just edge clear. The clash might have happened exactly the same way if qualifying had gone straight into the race, Hamilton had been jumped by Verstappen at the start, then tried to fight back. Or it might have been roles reversed, with Hamilton defending from an aggressive Verstappen attack. But that doesn't matter. The point is that the sprint race didn't cost the Grand Prix this defining, iconic moment. If anything, it actually helped set it up. So when you marry that to the fact the weekend benefited overall, it's easy to see why F1 were so pleased with themselves. F1 Managing Director of Motorsport Ross Brawn said, "Our belief was that it would add to more engagement for fans across 3 days, and it definitely did. I don't see how it did anything other than enhance the race weekend." But that's just Brawn's view. Let us know in the comments if you disagree. The reality is, while there were definitely flaws, and for the umpteenth time we're not saying the sprint race itself was absolutely mega, Formula 1 could scarcely have imagined that the debut weekend for its new format would go as well as this. It added an extra element, while the escalation of Friday's importance made the whole event feel more dynamic. There were a few problems here and there, like the pointless FP2 session on Saturday morning that was utterly meaningless for those of us watching, with cars in parc fermé conditions running around on track with different tyre compounds and unknown fuel loads. It made that even more boring than usual free practice. At least in FP1, FP2 and FP3 on a normal weekend, we have performance runs to look forward to. That was a view shared by almost every driver. Hamilton felt that FP2 on Saturday morning was a superfluous addition and even suggested it would be better for F1 to make this a 2-day format. His suggestion was that practice and qualifying be held on Saturday and the sprint races on Sunday morning before the Grand Prix. But that doesn't work with the commercially motivated idea of having 3 days of worthwhile action. So maybe the most realistic outcome is that we just accept FP2 isn't for anyone except the teams gathering a bit more important data and those at a trackside being able to watch cars on track. It's not really a TV spectacle, free practice never is, and it's a bit confusing that F1 always tries to insist otherwise. So F1 completed a very public experiment with just those grievances to log. No nasty surprises, or for us cynics, no obvious problems that prove the format's flaws. There were no question marks over the impact on the Grand Prix, and there was a solid enough sprint race itself. F1 needed to establish a baseline with this new format, and it got a very good one. It can now sell this on the basis of tweaking the small annoyances like FP2 being pointless, the terminology of the sprint, and what can be done about the pole stat. Though the likes of Brawn were confident, this is surely better than F1 cheaps could have hoped for. And unless Monza and the unconfirmed third sprint throw up something dramatically different, it seems inevitable this format will return next season and likely even at a few more races. We were quite cynical at the Race HQ before this event, but now we'd accept more of it. We'd just like F1 to take on Sebastian Vettel's suggestion to create a new column in the history books to record the sprint race winner so that the fastest driver in qualifying gets the pole position stat. Then let's never, ever, 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 ever speak of the Speed King award again. But enough about our opinion, what's yours? Love it, hate it, still not sure? Let us know in the comments and drop in any suggestions you have on how the format could be improved. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and if you're new here and want to come back for more, how about hitting that subscribe button as well?